Picture this. It is January 1540. The English coast rises out of gray winter sea, and you, a 24-year-old German princess named Anne of Cleves, step onto a foreign shore beneath a sky heavy with sleet. Your gown is heavy with sea spray, your heart pounding against the embroidered bodice. You have been told this is destiny. You are married to the most powerful monarch in Europe, King Henry VIII of England. To the outside world, this match will cement an alliance, protect kingdoms, and secure peace. To you, it is simply duty. But what no one dares to tell you is that your very presence, your very body, will humiliate the king who once sent armies across the Channel and split his church from Rome. The Henry you've heard about is a young lion, red-haired, athletic, a warrior with songs written in his honor. But that Henry died long ago. The man who waits for you is swollen with age and disease, his teeth blackened, his ulcered legs wrapped in foul bandages that seep beneath his hose. Once adored by armies, he is now carried about by servants, his body collapsing like a crumbling fortress. Still, to his court, he is the terror of Europe, the king who beheaded in Bullen, who defied the Pope, who made and unmade kingdoms with a flick of his ringed hand. No one dares laugh at him. No one dares suggest he is weak. But that winter, in the icy chambers of Greenwich Palace, Henry VIII will be laughed at, not by courtiers, not by enemies abroad, but by history itself. Because this wedding night, the most feared king in Christendom will march into his bride's chamber, desperate to prove his power still surges through his failing veins, only to emerge humiliated and broken. By dawn, rumors will ripple through his court like wildfire. The king could not. The king would not. The king was defeated not by France, not by Spain, but by a single German princess who never even tried. And that humiliation would haunt him forever, toppling ministers, changing alliances, and turning what should have been a triumph into a grotesque farce. This isn't a love story. It's a horror story. The night a king who built his reputation on strength and virility discovered he could no longer command even his own body. When Anne of Cleves agreed to marry Henry VIII, she imagined a king, perhaps worn by years, perhaps heavy with age, but still the noble warrior painted in her court's portraits. She had seen images of him on gleaming vellum, depicted in the prime of life, tall, broad-shouldered, fiery red hair blazing beneath a crown. That was the husband she expected. What awaited her in reality was something closer to a nightmare. Henry was only 48 years old, but disease and indulgence had aged him decades. His once athletic body was now grotesquely swollen. He weighed nearly 400 pounds, his girth so vast that mechanical pulleys were strapped into his chairs to hoist him up beneath heavy robes and jewels. His legs were consumed with ulcers that oozed and stank. His teeth rotted black, his breath sour with decay and infection. Every step was labored to the point of gasping, his bulk supported by attendants who helped guide him across the slippery palace floors. This was not the dazzling prince who dominated tournaments and led troops into battle. This was a rotting tyrant in silk, wheezing beneath a crushing body, his once sharp intelligence corroded by paranoia. Court whispers told his rages, of men beheaded for imagined slights, of wives discarded like broken toys. Yet, and had no choice. With the Reformation tearing Christendom apart, Spain and France looming as rivals, her marriage was a pawn's move in a desperate diplomatic chess game. England and Cleves needed each other. She was a living treaty. But as she prepared to meet Henry for the first time, she must have sensed truth in the nervous glances of courtiers. This was no fairy tale marriage. It was a dungeon in disguise, and she was walking straight into it. Henry VIII was obsessed with chivalric theater. To his mind, love and power were spectacles, staged like justs or masks. So when Anne of Cleves arrived in England, Henry resolved to greet her not as a bloated tyrant in velvet, but as a gallant suitor in disguise, a grand, romantic gesture straight out of medieval romance. On New Year's Day, 1540, the King of England slipped into Anne's chambers dressed not as the most powerful monarch in Christendom, but as a masked stranger. He imagined her eyes widening, her heart quickening at the sight of this mysterious knight. He would kiss her hand, and she, overwhelmed with awe, would instantly recognize beneath the costume the fiery presence of England's lion. That was Henry's fantasy. The reality was humiliation. Anne of Cleves, raised in the stiff formalities of the German court, was utterly bewildered by this stranger barging into her rooms. When Henry pressed an unsolicited kiss on her lips, she pulled back. She did not bow, swoon, or gasp. She stared at him blankly, her face as unreadable as a stone wall. And when staff revealed that the man she had just rebuffed was in fact King Henry himself, Anne's expression did not change. The greatest monarch in Europe, a man who had sent queens to their deaths, had just been ignored by a princess who looked bored. To Henry, it was nothing short of emasculation. A king who split from Rome could not even stir the heart of his own bride. What he had intended as a dazzling display of virility became a scene of ridicule. Courtiers squirmed, careful not to laugh, while Henry's pride bled like an open wound. That moment poisoned everything that followed. Instead of romance, Henry saw insult. Instead of desire, he felt contempt. To him, Anne of Cleves wasn't just foreign, she was unfit. And yet the marriage had to go on. The treaties were signed. The eyes of Europe were waiting. He would endure the wedding. But in Henry's private fury, one truth hardened. This princess had already humiliated him before the consummation even began. On January 6th, 1540, Henry and Anne of Cleves were married at Greenwich Palace. To the crowds and courtiers, it was a glittering ceremony. England's political triumph paraded in jewel cloth and gold. But everyone knew the truth. All the embroidery and music in the world wouldn't matter if the marriage wasn't sealed in the only chamber that counted, the bridal bed. And so, that night, Henry VIII, once Lion of Europe but now a bloated shadow of himself, shuffled toward humiliation. Picture the bridal chamber. Heavy velvet hangings trap the damp winter air. Candles flicker, casting long shadows over a wide bed strewn with gilt sheets. The courtiers and servants bow away, leaving a silence that hangs like a noose, and sits waiting, nervous, polite, unaware that everything she does in the next few hours will ripple through the history of Europe. Then the king enters. He is nearly 50, swollen with disease, his body creaking under the weight of furs and jewels. He limps to her, breath ragged, the foul reek of his ulcerated legs mingling with the perfumes burned to hide them. His teeth, once bright, are black stubs in a swollen, reddened face. This is her husband, England's great king. Henry removes his layers, a grotesque unveiling. The courtly armor of velvet and pearls falls away, revealing a torso sagging like melted wax. His legs, wrapped in linen soaked with poultices, gleam with wetness from wounds that never heal. Anne is silent. Perhaps a flicker of revulsion crosses her face. Perhaps not. But to Henry, every hesitation is a dagger. The king climbs into bed. History tells us what came next in the king's own words. Nothing. By morning, Henry confessed he had not consummated the marriage. He blamed her, said she was ugly, said her body repelled him, said she smelled. But everyone who knew Henry knew the truth. The man who had executed wives for failing to give him sons could no longer even attempt the act himself. He tried to salvage pride by insisting he was not impotent. He bragged to doctors and ministers about having emissions in his sleep, as though it proved his virility. But in the cold light of morning, all of England's great court knew the real story. The King of England had been defeated by his own failing body, humiliated not by war or diplomacy, but in his own wedding bed. And still worse, foreign ambassadors whispered. Across Europe, the story spread. Henry had married a German princess and found her so unpleasing that his body could not rise. To some, Anne's supposed plainness was to blame. But quietly, in corners of palaces, the rumor was more delicious, that Anne had done nothing at all, and that this terrifying king, swollen with pride and flesh, had humiliated himself before her. Think of it. Henry VIII, the man who defied the Pope, who burned monks, who split Christendom, crawled from his bride's chamber whispering excuses of ugliness while disguising the more terrifying truth. The Lion of England had no teeth left to bite. That wedding night changed everything. It destroyed Henry's faith in the marriage, sealed his fate as queen for barely half a year, and lit the fuse of political downfall that would send Thomas Cromwell, the architect of the match, to the scaffold. The bedchamber humiliation was not just a private failure. It was a public disaster. the undoing of kingship itself, revealed between sheets soaked not in royal passion, but in royal shame. By dawn after the wedding, the palace was buzzing. People expected the King of England to emerge triumphant, flushed with conquest, ready to announce that he had fulfilled his husbandly duty. Instead, what they got was silence, and then Henry's excuses. He began loudly telling anyone who would listen that Anne of Cleves disgusted him. He declared she smelled of another world, that her breasts sagged, that her body was offensive. He publicly mocked her in the most intimate, degrading terms, painting himself as a victim of a disastrous bargain. Everyone was supposed to nod along, pretend his failure was her fault, but in the whispering corners of the court, the truth was obvious. Henry's body was rotting from the inside out. No potion, no flattery, no perfumed chamber could disguise it. His impotence was not his fault. It was his decay. Courtiers who once trembled at his temper now exchanged sidelong glances. The king who executed wives for failing to give him sons could not even make the attempt himself. The irony was brutal. This was the man who turned England upside down to divorce Catherine of Aragon, the man who sent Anne Boleyn to the block because she produced no male heir, the tyrant who forced Jane Seymour through childbirth while he prowled for his next consort. And yet here was Henry VIII, too sick, too hollowed, too broken to consummate the very marriage he claimed would secure England's future. Worse, the gossip left borders. In the embassies of Europe, the story crackled like fire through dry grass. Reports of Anne's ugliness were met not with sympathy, but with suppressed laughter, because everyone knew the deformity lay with Henry. Across France, Spain, and the Empire, kings smirked as they heard their old rival couldn't even rule his own bed. For Henry, humiliation was intolerable. Monarchs could survive defeats in war. They could even survive rebellion. But to be mocked, to be whispered of as a man unmanned, a king stripped of virility, this was a scar deeper than any battlefield wound. The wedding that was meant to reinforce English power had instead made its monarch a living jest. And Henry never forgave a joke at his expense. If Henry's wedding night was a personal disaster, its political fallout was catastrophic. Someone had to pay for the king's humiliation, and Henry, as always, chose blood. The man responsible for the Anne of Cleves match was none other than Thomas Cromwell, Henry's most powerful minister. It was Cromwell who pushed the marriage treaty, Cromwell who argued that and would secure England's alliances against Spain and France, Cromwell who promised the king he would be satisfied with his German bride. Instead, she became the woman who broke his pride. Imagine Henry pacing through Whitehall, gnawing on the rage of his own impotence, replaying Anne's blank stare and his courtiers' whispered laughter. For once he could not kill the rumor. He could not execute the truth. But he could destroy the man who brought her to England. A scapegoat was needed, and Cromwell's head fit perfectly on the block. By the spring of 1540, Henry was turning on his former ally. Cromwell was accused of treason and heresy, even secretly plotting with Protestant factions. But the real charge was unspeakable. He had humiliated the king. Court gossip put it in sharper terms. He gave Henry a bride who broke his pride, and Cromwell paid with his head. The execution was swift and merciless. On July 28, 1540, Cromwell's head rolled from the scaffold on Tower Hill, while Henry feasted and toasted to his downfall. It was the ultimate object lesson. In Henry's England, failure in the field of war could be excused, but failure in the bedchamber, embarrassing the king himself, was treason. Anne of Cleves lived, but the man who arranged her marriage did not. Her survival was bought with Cromwell's blood, spilled to erase a king's humiliation. Here lies the great twist in Anne of Cleves' story. Unlike Catherine Howard, dragged screaming to the block, or Anne Boleyn, beheaded by her husband's order, this German princess played the game differently and won. After 6 humiliating months of non-consummation, Henry demanded a way out. The king who had bragged of virility now stood before Parliament claiming he could not with Anne, that the marriage was void, that his body betrayed him only because his bride was not pleasing enough. It was an annulment soaked in lies. But instead of fighting, Anne agreed. She signed her name to papers, bowed her head, and in doing so, transformed from victim to survivor. By surrendering the crown, she saved her life. And Henry rewarded her with the next best thing, wealth and freedom, and was gifted lavish estates, including Hever Castle, the former home of Anne Boleyn. She was showered with jewels, servants, and an income fit for royalty. Henry gave her the honorary title, the king's beloved sister, an affectionate smokescreen to disguise his humiliation. In court hierarchy, she remained close to the throne, ranking above nearly every noble woman in England. The irony was delicious. Anne of Cleves was the only Tudor wife who walked away smiling. She became one of the richest women in England, attended court when she pleased, and most importantly, outlived Henry himself and every other wife he took. While Catherine and Anne Boleyn lost their heads, while his true loves suffered misery and death, and lived into comfortable older age, surrounded by wealth, the woman who humiliated Henry on their wedding night never tasted executioner's steel. Instead, she tasted victory, freedom bought by patient silence and the king's own shame. She had been dealt the worst hand, but she played it better than any queen of Henry's reign. She outlived them all, the only Tudor wife who walked away richer, freer, and smiling. Henry VIII is remembered as the brutal monarch who broke from Rome, who defied the Pope, who bent an entire kingdom to his will. He crushed monasteries, burned rebels, and sent even queens to the block without hesitation. On the battlefield and in Parliament, he styled himself as unstoppable, a lion who devoured all before him. And yet his most infamous defeat happened not in war, but in the privacy of his own bedchamber. The marriage to Anne of Cleves revealed the truth he could never admit. Beneath the robes of state and the crown of England was a man undone by his own failing body. All the crowns in Europe could not disguise the rancid stench of his ulcers, the impotence of his desire, or the laughter that followed him from Greenwich to every court in Europe. This is the cruel irony of kingship. Tyrants can execute enemies, burn history books, and punish rumor with the axe, but humiliation, once whispered, cannot be erased. And did not need to conspire, did not need to resist. Simply by existing, by failing to flatter his wounded vanity, she stripped the mask from England's most terrifying king. And what followed is a lesson as old as power itself. Humiliate a tyrant, and he will spill blood to cleanse the sting. Thomas Cromwell's fall, foreign laughter, the tightening of Henry's paranoia, all flowed from a single disastrous wedding night. The politics of England shifted because a king could not conquer his own shame. 5 centuries later, the image lingers like a ghost in Tudor history. Henry, conqueror of wives and nations, creeping from the bridal chamber mumbling excuses of ugliness, while everyone knew where the true deformity lay. The king who split with Rome and sent queens to the block was defeated not by rebellion, not by armies, but by a single young princess who humiliated him on his wedding night.